Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is John Nichols, an iconic New Mexico writer. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, you're more than an iconic writer because you're a photographer, you're a screenwriter, you're a philosopher, you're a naturalist, and we're here today to celebrate this beautiful new book of yours called My Heart Belongs to Nature. And what's the subtitle? A memoir in photographs?
I think a memoir in photographs and prose.
So let me just put you in context. Your book last year was the annual Big Arsenic Fishing Contest, a fiction, wonderful buddy tale, very, very funny.
But also tragic.
Tragic comedy, yeah. Yes, you do tragic comedy very well. It's true, you will always be connected to an earlier work you did 36 years ago, but still alive and kicking, the Milagro Beanfield War, a wonderful story of water, land, greed, and la gente in New Mexico.
My beautiful albatross.
Yes, because you do say that when people start asking you about that, they say, I read your book, and you're going, oh, was it
Could it be
arsenic?
American blood? Could it be on the Mesa?
Yeah,
Could it
no,
be
but
the
it's
sterile
always
cuckoo?
Milagro. And then you say that it's like, it makes you want to grit your teeth and scream, because that was 36 years ago.
Yeah, but it's really nice that you get remembered for something.
It is very nice. And it was the first book of a trilogy. So they first came Milagro Beanfield War, and they told you, oh my God, you can't have a foreign word in your title. It'll never sell. It'll never work as a film either. And
They were right.
No.
They were right with the foreign word in the title. I remember when the book came out, people say, what's the name of your new novel? And I'd say The Milagro Beanfield War, and they'd say, what? And I'd say The Milagro Beanfield War, and they'd say, what? And I'd say The Milagro Beanfield War, and they'd still say, what? I mean, it was a serious impediment.
Well, the second book was Nirvana Blues.
And the Magic Journey.
The Magic Journey.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, tell me, because isn't that your favorite?
That's my favorite, yeah. After I wrote The Milagro Beanfield War, so many people would come up to me and say, I loved your book. It's so funny. It's just hilarious. It's the funniest book I've ever read. And I said, well, gee, it's also a book about cultural genocide, right? And maybe I should write another book where it's really clear that it's not much fun, to live in extreme poverty and to be at the bottom of the scale of the economic system in our country. And so The Magic Journey is a lot more serious, and it sort of lays out the politics in a more self-conscious fashion. Although I also think it's a pretty funny book, with quotation marks around funny.
Yes, and the third?
The third, The Nirvana Blues, is just a vicious satire on where it's all headed, basically. And it was a satire on the me generation, a satire on all kinds of spirituality and consciousness raising, from, Scientology to yada, yada, yada. And but I felt that it was the logical conclusion of where our country was headed.
Well, your new book, you had even said in the introduction, it's so nice to not do any propagandizing, environmental rants, any of that stuff, but to simply get to write about the beauty of nature. And you write like I've never really experienced what you present here. Tell us how you came to do this book.
I was raised, first of all, by naturalist father and grandfather. My grandfather was the curator of fishes at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. So when I was a kid, I would always take the train. When I'm 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I'd take the train with him from Garden City out in Long Island, where he lived, into the museum. and hang around in his office, or I was allowed to just have the run of the American Museum of Natural History, you know, all the back the back rooms, the back corridors and stuff. And my grandfather also collected lots of fishes for the museum. So in his office he had shelves of bottles full of formaldehyde with pollywogs and frogs and sticklebacks and all kinds of little fish in these bottles, right? So I was a little genocidal maniac when I was a kid because I would have bottles of formaldehyde on my bureau. And, you know, I would collect frogs and salamanders and put them in these bottles of formaldehyde. And also my dad, from the age of about 14 until he was, 24 or 25, he collected small mammals for the American Museum of Natural History. He was a field zoologist. And I used to follow him when he checked his traps and picked up shrews and meadow voles and little animals like that. And he'd give them to me to put in his collecting pouch, and then I would sit at the kitchen table and watch him, dissect and prepare all the museum specimens. So I got to see all these little critters up close, and to touch their fur and everything. And my dad would explain to me all about these animals, their life histories, their life cycles. He also bombarded me with the Latin names, right, which I never really learned. And I would walk with him. He was a professional ornithologist. And we'd just go on walks when I was a kid looking at birds. And I always had a pair of binoculars when I was 6, 7, 8, or 9 years old. And he also could tell me every song of every bird. I mean, half the birds back east, this is on Long Island, in hardwood forests, you can't see the birds. But every time a bird went tweet, tweet, or tootle, tootle, my dad would say, oh, that's an ovenbird, that's a red-eyed vireo, that's a brown thrasher, that's a towhee, or whatever. And sometimes he'd go out with a tape recorder. He had a very good Uher, I think, UHER tape recorder. Back in those days, anyway, it was good. And he'd tape record the bird calls, and then we'd go home, and he would play them for me, but slow them down so that you can hear a lot of the notes that you can't hear in the wild, that kind of thing. So I grew up in that kind of atmosphere.
I want to stop you there because later in life, you got to go back to the museum. Yeah. Tell me that. And you saw his handwritten identification tags and the very animals that he had preserved.
One of the things I never saw in my life is I never saw his collections at the American Museum of Natural History. And 3 years ago, my younger brother was in Hawaii on vacation and got caught in a riptide and he drowned. And so I went back east for the memorial service for my little brother. And I had a biologist friend at Hamilton College who got in touch with the American Museum of Natural History and said John would really like to see his dad's collection. And so part of going home to honor my brother was to get a tour of the back rooms of the American Museum of Natural History and pull out all these drawers. And I got to see all these lemmings that my father collected in Alaska, like when he was 20 years old. I got to see bats that he collected in Florida when he was 17 years old and stuff. And for me, it was very moving to see all these animals in this enormous collection, right, that the museum has, that my father had prepared when he was very young. And people say, oh gosh, well, killing animals is terrible and all that stuff. And I say, you got to understand, this is how humanity has learned about the natural world that sustains us. And I try and explain to people that I think last year I had a friend who was over in London. She's a geologist who teaches at LSU. And they took her in the London Museum and opened the drawers to show her the finches that Charles Darwin had captured on the Galapagos that led to his writings on the origin of species. And for me, looking at my father's animals in the American Museum of Natural History probably gave me the same feeling that it would be to see something like those finches. You know, what naturalists and field zoologists have contributed to our knowledge of the world that we live in.
So you moved to Taos
Uh-huh.
in 1969,
Yeah.
and you were very politically active, and you were, writing. You were writing then?
I've always been writing since
Yeah.
I was 15 years old. I mean, I've written 80 or 100 books. I've published 21 or 22 of them, but I'm always writing.
So
And I came to New Mexico really working hard within the movement, the anti-war movement, the environmental movement, the Puerto Rican liberation movement. I was very interested in Reyes Tijerinas Alianza in New Mexico, struggling to get back land grants. And I came here thinking that New Mexico was the one place I could move to in the United States that was as close to the third world as I could get without actually being there, because New Mexico was either the poorest state or the next to poorest state. So I came here with real political direction, wanting to work in social justice activities in New Mexico, and I had no idea that the land of New Mexico, particularly up north,
Yes.
where the mountains go up to 13,000 feet. I had no idea that the land was so wonderful.
But you continued the training as a naturalist that you had inherited and grown
Yeah.
up with, because I understand. I want you to talk about this. This book is culled from 45 years of your, I don't know how long, but
Photographs.
yeah. And didn't you also take field notes when you would go? You'd snowshoe up to.
I took field notes every trip that I've almost ever taken, whether it was out on Taos Mesa, down in the Rio Grande Gorge, up in the southeast area, the Rio Chiquito, Pie Creek, the Little Rio Grande, or in the high mountains. And my dad always took field notes. When I went out birding or looking at the natural world with my father, he was constantly writing things down or talking into little tape recorders, and keeping records.
Yes.
Notebooks and notebooks and notebooks. And he would draw beautiful pictures, right? And I used to go grouse hunting a lot in September up in Taos County. And yet I kept field notes of every trip that I took. And I would collect the botany and press the leaves of the different plants and flowers. And I'd pick up bird feathers, which I did all during my childhood. And I'd tape these feathers into my journals. And they're all now at the University of New Mexico Center for Southwest Research at Zimmerman Library. So it's a habit I've been doing all my life. And walking, particularly the last 12 or 13 years after I lost my coordination, and just sort of walked in the mountains, I would take photographs every trip, but not art photographs, just to click to show what the landscape was like, what the weather was like, what I was seeing, and field notes that I'd type up when I got home. And I now have like about 8 drawers, file cabinets, just loaded with film packets, because this is all film, not digital, and the packets all have what's in them, but I'll never organize all of that. And the field notes, I have thousands of pages of moving around a pretty small area in the high country, right? But it's an area where nobody goes. It was just empty. I think I spent 10 years in sort of one basin without ever seeing another person.
Well, we're speaking today with John Nichols about this beautiful book, My Heart Belongs to Nature. And so did you then go through those photographs and those notes to compile this? It must have been a lengthy process.
I had about 75 Kodak carousels, each carousel with 140 slides in it. And then I had something like 240 of those little yellow boxes
Yes.
that Kodak sends you back with transparencies in them. And I decided to go through and inventory everything, throw away what was useless, which was about 3/4 of it, and to inventory it all for the Center for Southwest Research in Albuquerque, at the Zimmerman Library. And so I did that, and it took me over a year to do that. And I thought, if I'm going to go to all this trouble, maybe I should try and do one last photography book. And also, it's like I've done some other photo essay books, and I always felt that half the photographs were good photographs and half of them really stunk, right? Or they weren't very good. I said, maybe I can do one book where every photograph is pretty much the way I'd like it to be. And I also took photographs from books I've published before. I mean, some of the photographs in this book have been published over the years.
I didn't ask you this beforehand, but are there a couple of photographs you would like to have us do a close-up of, and you can tell us about them? Why don't you take a minute and choose one?
I can, I mean, there's one of the things that is really important to me with this book is every photograph is personal. Every photograph is of an area or a place where I've spent years and years wandering around it. There's no, I never gone to Yosemite to take pictures of the glorious, waterfalls. I've never gone to the Grand Canyon. Like, taking photographs of places where I don't live and am intimately connected to has never interested me, Like, even traveling around New Mexico, taking glorious photographs of places where I don't live but that are sensationally beautiful. I'd never do that.
You have a series of stock pond photographs.
Yes.
And you quote Elliot Porter, who says you can go to the same place 1,000,000 times and always see something different.
Always see something different, or even if you see something that's the same thing, it's usually wonderful.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just, you want me to just go through it random?
Well, just
And
find ones that you love, and then we'd like to do a close-up.
well, this
Hold it up, and then we'll do a
oh,
close-up.
okay.
Yeah.
Like this picture is my friend Mike Kimmel, and he's snapcasting for trout on the Rio Grande del Rancho, which is a little tiny stream southeast of Taos. And he and I fished together for 25 years on these little rivers, and we did this again and again and again. We had so much fun. We loved the fishing. We loved the area that we were going to, the meadows, the wildlife. After we fished, we'd love getting in my truck and opening beers and eating sandwiches on the tailgate. This is a photograph of the Ox Trail Rock Garden on the Rio Grande, which is my favorite place in the world to fish. And it's just huge boulders. And you can move back and forth across the river on the boulders. It's lots of white water. It's almost impossible to pull a fish out of there. And it's so much fun. And you work so hard getting down this trail to the river. And you work so hard in those rocks. But it's the kind of area where nobody really wants to fish because it's too hard. And for me, it was just wonderful. Stock ponds.
Yes.
There's these.
We'll
I
share
often
too.
tell people that I'm the world's foremost authority on filming stock ponds, and most people pay no attention to them because usually they're dry. They don't even have any water in them. These are both on the western mesa of Taos. They're two different stock ponds and two different moods, and I would sit for years. I'd just go out to the stock ponds and I'd set up a camera, but I would just sit there and watch the life that came to the stock pond. And you would have ibises come in, you would have avocets come in and start, walking along, swishing their bills back and forth. You would have phalaropes, little birds, shorebirds, and start twirling in circles to kick up microscopic things that they ate. I remember, and if you don't move, everything will come in. Ducks, cranes, killdeer, just whatever. I just remember once a sanderling was at this little stock pond, and I was sitting down near the water, and the sanderling came along the mud, picking up little microscopic arthropods or whatever, and it walked right up to my sneaker and started pecking the stuff from the creases in my sneaker. And you just don't move, right? And
so we'll look at one more photograph, and then I'd like you to read a little from the book, too.
All right. This photograph here is of Tres Orejas Mountain. It's a mountain in the middle of the Western Mesa. You can climb this mountain. It only takes about 20 minutes. And you're in the center of sort of the Taos Valley universe. And you can see up to Colorado, to Mount Blanca and Fort Garland. You can see over to the Hamish. You can see over to Pickery's Peak. You can see west to the San Juan Mountains, etc. And I used to climb this mountain like once a week, just drive over. And now there's a commune kind of earthships on the west side of the mountain. And there's lots of private property, do not trespass, keep out, this means you, and so I don't go there anymore.
So would you be so kind, we had talked about maybe reading the 9/11 part. We're going to have to read the short version of it.
We'll read the short version.
Okay, tell us how, set it up for us.
Okay. The setup, first of all, the whole book is, I've given so many speeches that are doomsday ecology. I mean, I've given 100 speeches about climate change, the environment, greenhouse gases. I mean, I've gotten up, and I sound like Rachel Carson, right?
But you have the cutest thing on your website, because you say books, click here, and if you want to know about my life, click here. If you're an environmentalist trying to save the world from climate change, click lots of luck.
Yeah, no. And anyway, this book, I decided no environmental doomsday at all, right? Let's just do something that's very quiet, very clear, just about the natural world that we depend on. And on 9/11, September 11th in 2001, I had plans to climb a high mountain with a friend, and I woke up late at 1 o'clock, and there were all my phone messages from people in New York City talking about 9/11. I turned on the television set, saw the planes hitting the towers in the Pentagon, and then I said, I'm not going to sit here and watch television. Let's go climb that mountain. So myself and a friend climbed a 12,881 foot mountain. And this last chapter in the book is just about what a beautiful day it was, climbing that mountain. And we reached the top of the peak, and we glanced all around from the top of the peak. You can just see mountains. You can see up to the Spanish Peaks in Colorado. You can see Mount Blanca and Fort Garland. You can see Sandia Peak in Albuquerque, 130 miles away, right? You can see a faint outline of that. And we got to the top of the mountain, and I just mentioned toward the last chapter of the book that the mountaintops all around us were familiar to me because I'd studied them for several years. I like to recite their names: Wheeler Peak and Old Mike, Lew Wallace, Spoon Mountain, Bayecito, Pueblo Peak, Picaries, Lake Fork Peak, Sentinel Crag, Fraser Mountain, Kachina, South Fork Peak, and Gold Hill, Lobo Peak, Mount Walter, Mount Kimmel, Simpson, and beyond. These were my universe. And I could imagine that nobody else on earth was outdoors, let alone up high, just me and my friend. And we absorbed the placid afternoon, No noise disturbed us. There were no planes flew overhead. Air, for this one special moment, was unmolested by machines. A breath held tranquility to find the atmosphere. The world seemed benign, without any threat, a remarkable sensation. 3 ravens kept circling above us, not in a hurry, going nowhere, just enjoying the thermals, I suppose. No contrails crossed the sky. Of course, we got off the ridge before dark, and the mood was broken as we returned to civilization and its consequences. But ever since that afternoon, I've chosen to remember 9/11 also as a beautiful day, very peaceful and capable of expressing hope.
Lovely, lovely. So this book has just come out, and I can't recommend it any higher than this is just one of the most beautiful books, and that anyone who's amassing a collection of New Mexico photographs and essays, this must be in their collection.
That's sweet of you to say. One final picture.
Okay, sure.
This is my friend Susan Crutchfield arriving at the top of the mountain on 9/11. That's just the moment when she got up to the cairn that's on top of the mountain.
Right, and that's a very different image from the one we associate with that day.
Absolutely.
And thank you for providing a counterpoint or balance for all of that. Well, we're almost out of time. Just tell me if you have a message for our New Mexicans out here who are watching you.
My message, of course, is at this moment in history, history is always struggle. Ever since I've been in New Mexico, I've been in one struggle or another for water rights, for land rights, for social justice rights, etc. And we depend for survival, the human race does, on the biology that sustains us. And New Mexicans, people that I've known in New Mexico, many of my friends who have been agricultural, they've worked on acequias and that kind of stuff, care a lot for the land. Just keep caring for it and re-educate ourselves if we've kind of lost touch with the biology that sustains us, with the land that keeps us alive.
Well, thank you very much. The book, My Heart Belongs to Nature, a memoir in photographs and prose, written by iconic New Mexico author John Nichols. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.